Hello, everyone. Hello, hello, hello. What is going on? Thank you for joining me on this episode of Let's Talk. If you're not familiar with Let's Talk, this is a different aspect of the gospel truth where we talk about cultural things, we talk about the Bible, we talk about God, we talk about theology, we talk about all kind of stuff, right? We talk about different things that's going on within our culture right now. So that's a little bit what we're going to do today, right? We're going to talk about the sovereignty of God. We're going to talk about the different aspects of His will, and also I do want to talk about the George Floyd footage, the new footage that came out maybe about a week ago or so now. And I do want to go into that just a little bit to just get a different perspective, because the information that was put out to us initially was that George Floyd was murdered due to racial implications. You know, people seen it as another white man killing another black man. You know, and sometimes, you know, we can get caught up into that mood, and we don't allow different areas of evidence to reveal themselves, or, you know, we may suppress some of these different areas of evidence. And I think it's important for us to dive into these type of things. And that's what Let's Talk is all about. If you joined me last time, Let's Talk, what did we discuss? We discussed, I forget. Sorry about that. I forget what we discussed, but it was a different area, something that's going on in our culture. And, yeah, so be on the lookout for more of these type of episodes of Let's Talk. With that, man, I do want to thank you for joining me. If you can, before we go into this, I do encourage you to go ahead and like and follow, subscribe, because on the Gospel Truth, not only do I have an area for Let's Talk, but I also host a lot of debates as well. And I do interviews. So if you are interested to see what the Gospel Truth has, you can go to the Gospel Truth page and you can see the rest of the content there to be able to help you understand what exactly the gospel truth is all about. It's engaging the Christian truth, engaging the culture of Christian truth. But this aspect of Let's Talk is engaging the culture through the biblical lens, and how we engage that. So like, subscribe. Also, all this content is on podcast. Well, the Let's Talk aspect is not on podcast. Perhaps some point I will have the desire to put it on podcast, but I have yet to do that. But all the debates and all the interviews that's associated with the Gospel Truth is on podcast. So it's on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, all those areas where podcasts are there, where podcasts are presented. And also the Gospel Truth has a Facebook page. Perhaps you are watching this broadcast now from Facebook. If you are and you have not liked and hit the notification bell on Facebook, make sure you do that, so you can stay in the loop of not only what we're talking about Let's Talk, but also the Gospel Truth, as far as the debates and everything. So with that said, I do want to go ahead and get into this. So the first area that I want to go with this, I do want to go ahead and check out the George Floyd footage. Like I said, as you know, the George Floyd footage has been slung around, you know, and people have dove into the different interpretations. So with this, I also want to gauge you guys' interest, right? I want to be able to interact with your comments, and interact with your statements as we go through these videos. And I can't do that without your participation, obviously. So make sure that you are commenting. If you desire me to answer a question, make sure you throw that question at me. I do the best I can to answer that question. Or if you just want to make a statement, if I see that it hits the nail right on the head of the topic, then I will probably interact with it and give you a little bit of shout out there. So if you care enough to interact, go for it. If you don't, then that's fine. But perhaps you will in the future. Let me pull this up real quick so I can actually see you guys' comments. Hold on, give me 1 second. I think this is it right here. And take a little bit of time here. Right. And on. All right, so let me put this over here so I can see you guys' comments as they come in. And we can get into this real quick. So the George Floyd footage, the whole idea of George Floyd, if you remember what was going on with George Floyd. So George Floyd was a resident of Minnesota, Minneapolis, Minnesota, and he was killed by the hands of a cop. Okay, and the cop was kneeling on his neck for I think 9 minutes, and they ended up killing him. But you know, the autopsy evidence says that he was on fentanyl and some other drugs, and you know, the autopsy said that was probably a part of why he died. Was that the full reason? I personally don't believe so. I believe that his demise eventually came by the pressing on the neck. But they say that the drugs played a huge factor in that he was on drugs and it played a huge factor in that. But let me pull this up so we can go through this. But so what happened is that there are many who jump to the conclusion that it was all about race. And now we have what we have now with the rioting. Black Lives Matter has stepped in, and Antifa has stepped in, and so we see all these things going on. You know, over there in Portland, I believe that rioting has been going on for the last, I want to say the last 60 something days. Rioting and tearing stuff up, destroying stuff has been going on, and the reason that they give is because it's injustice going on, and things are not fair. Inequality, they claim they're fighting over, but they're burning stuff up and taking away people's businesses because of this quote unquote inequality. So let me see if I can get this thing up. Let me pull it up real quick. Hopefully that the audio will be there as well, because I do want to make sure the audio is there. Give me 1 second, people, and I will have this thing up. Okay, let me make this thing big. Let me see. Start from the beginning, so we can really get a good view of what's going on here. Like I said, this is the body cam footage, just to give a different perspective of what's going on with this incident. So let me press play, and we can go get into it. Let me pop up at the bottom of the screen so I can give my commentary as we go through this thing. All right, so we go play real quick. All right, so as you can see, this is the body cam footage of what's going on. This is at the beginning, right? This is told right after he was giving the counterfeit bill. The store clerk said that's a counterfeit bill. As you see, the subtitle said there's a fake bill. So the driver is here. So. Oh. And you can see, like, he's telling him to put his hands up. So, yeah, so right now, they haven't got over there yet, but they are going to go over there with George Floyd. See, this is the perspective that we didn't see. We didn't see this angle, right? So This is a different area of where the evidence was allowed. And I blame this on the press. The press, when they put this information out, they didn't give the full story. From what I understand, it was actually the cam evidence, the police cam evidence that actually assisted in bringing charges against these cops. So, yeah. Okay, hold on, folks. I want to. Hold on. I actually have one where you can actually hear the audio. So let me get that one up so you can actually hear the audio. I want you guys to really hear um, what's actually going on here. So let me get that one up so you can actually hear the audio. Oh man, I had it. Let me see what's going on here. Let me set this one up. I think I can get it up. Get this audio. Hold on with me. Okay, let me see if that will come up, bring it up. No, it wasn't. Oh, man. All right, so let me just share this again. I was hoping that I'll be able to get the audio in there because I really want you guys to hear it. So, guess not. See, they're saying that he's resisting. I mean, you can see that they're talking to him. Um, It appears to me that they're attempting to try to reason with him at the beginning. They're attempting to reason with him. They're trying to say, hey, man, calm down. Looked like the cop was trying to take notes to try to get some of his information to be able to run his background to see if he has any priors or anything like that. If you can't tell, if you haven't seen this, that's what was the whole idea of him taking the pad out and get some information. They're spelling his name, and now they're running his background, so they're still talking to him. But eventually they're going to try to put him in the back of the car to arrest him for a counterfeit bill. So I think that's the motive of the cops to arrest him, and we'll see what happens after that. And right now, George Floyd the whole time right now is, he keeps screaming, and they had just asked him, is he on anything? Is he on drugs or anything? And they just said he has foam, or does he have foam around his mouth? And right now the cops are just saying, stop falling down, stop falling down. They're talking to him. And right now he's saying that he's claustrophobic. They're trying to put him in the car. He's saying that he's claustrophobic. And right now they're checking his pockets and everything to see if he has any. So the cops at this point are trying to get him in a car, and he said that the cops are saying, get in the car so we can talk. so we can talk. It appears to me that there's some level of resistance there. We can't sit there and say that there's no level of resistance. There appears to be some level of resistance, and if you're honest with the footage, that is the case. That there appears to be some level of resistance. Now, does this level of resistance require the cops to put their knee on his neck for 9 minutes, knowing that he may be under some drugs or something like that, or maybe something that restricts his breathing or something like that? I don't think that warrants that. I don't think it warrants that type of behavior. I don't think it warrants that type of interaction, because if he's on drugs, would it not logically come to mind that he may be having trouble breathing? It seems like the cops disregarded that aspect of it, and I think that is where the foul play comes in, where the cops was super negligent in their care of the suspect. They didn't take good care of him, and though he was resisting, it's still the cops' obligation to do what they need do to take care of the suspect, and not kneel on his neck for 9 minutes, knowing that he's losing consciousness. And that should have been very, very, very evident to the cops that were involved in this. And unfortunately, it was not. And that's where the foul play comes in my opinion. And you see his resisting going on. He's still fighting them. They're trying to put him in a car. He's complaining that he can't breathe. He's claustrophobic. I'm not sure if there's any other means they could have took as far as that's concerned. But as you can see, he's fighting, and I guess he attempts to get out the other side of the car because he didn't want to be in the car. So it looks like he's getting out the other side of the car. The cops are fighting him. They're wrestling with him. He's not obliging in the nature that he should have. And you hear the person in the background. I want you guys. That's why I wish the audio was on here. I wasn't able to get any audio, but the person in the background was like, "Hey man, you're gonna die of a heart attack." So his friend that was with him, I guess, was warning Floyd, "Hey man, you're gonna die of a heart attack if you don't calm down." So we'll see also through this video that his friend actually tells him, "Hey man, just get in the car. Just get in the car." So we see him now he's on the ground, and we see they're stretching him out, and now this is where they pin him down, and Officer Chauvin, kneels on his neck for 9 minutes. For 9 minutes, Chauvin kneels on his neck, and this is pretty much where where Floyd is going to pass away. And he's screaming "Mama!" He's screaming "Mama!" Floyd is screaming "Mama!" He's calling out for his mother. And you can see, and he's screaming "Mama, I love you," and it sounds like he's saying he loves him to several individuals that he's saying that he loves. And he's saying he can't breathe. This is where I think the cops should have been more aware of what's going on. Say George Floyd's continuously saying that he's hurting, he can't breathe, he can't breathe, he can't breathe. So, yeah. Continuously saying he can't breathe, he can't breathe. And then one cop actually says, well, you're talking so you can breathe. I think there should have been a little bit more, I guess, I'm back, I'm sort of speaking from the rear view now, backseat coaching in a sense, so and he said it, you're talking, you're breathing, you're talking just fine, you're breathing. And you can slowly hear Floyd slowly losing consciousness. It's getting there. He's slowly losing it. And you can slowly hear him going out. Slowly hear him going out. And you can hear everybody that from that first footage that we got when it first was revealed, you can hear those individuals that were recording from the other angle with their cell phones. You can hear them from the other side of the street, other side of the car, saying what they were saying on the other video. And he's asking for water. And I think that's it. I think that's all we need to see right there. I mean, that is the other footage that we saw that was released, the body cam footage that was released. So yeah, it's pretty tough, pretty brutal. When we dive into this kind of stuff, man. And I mean, what do you guys say about this? I mean, do you guys say that did they handle the situation correctly? Did they handle the situation? Was it fair? The way they handled the situation? What do you guys think about this? Because I'm in a situation. I mean, I believe that the footage does not show any racial implications per se. Obviously, we don't know the conditions of man's heart. We don't know what they have in their heart as far as racism. But I would not say, looking at it from this perspective, getting another view, that the motive was racist, that they killed George Floyd. I wouldn't say that. But if you let the press tell you, if you let the news tell you, the media tell you, they will say, yes, it was racially motivated. It was a racially motivated incident, and there's no other way to look at it. And if you look at it any other way, you are a bigot, you are a racist, and you are not viewing it from the correct lens, because culture says that you should view it from this particular lens. But if you desire to look at the evidence, desire to dissect the evidence, you will see that from the footage that we just seen, you will see that it was not necessarily the motive was not necessarily a racist motive. And I think that's something we should take into consideration, because as Christians, now I'm bringing the Christian worldview into this. The Christian worldview says that we shall not lie. We shall not bear false witness. We shall not say things about someone that isn't true, right? Now, if these individuals did show a level of racism, if these individuals did show that, let's get, like, I'm going to say the word, let's get this nigger. If something of that nature did come out, then yes, that will be great evidence to say that the motive was probably racism, was probably racist. But that kind of evidence did not come out. That is the type of evidence that we see in the Ahmaud Arbery case, I believe it is, the Ahmaud Arbery case, where one of the, one of the individuals that came in, they had him in a court hearing or something like that, and they said that they heard the father when, if you remember the Ahmaud Arbery case, where they said the dude, black guy, was running. They claimed that he was running anyway. going out for a jog. His family said that he was going out for a jog. And they said that he was inside of empty, vacant homes. I guess homes under construction, or they were vacant, one of the two. And what ended up happening is that this father and his son decided to play hero. They chased this man down in their trucks. They caught up with him, or they blocked him off with their truck, caught up with him, and they shot him. They began to wrestle with the gun, and they ended up shooting him and killing Mr. Aubrey. So from what I've heard is that one of the witnesses, or one of the individuals that I guess they interviewed certain witnesses, said that they heard that the father that killed Aubrey actually said, you nigger. So when evidence of that such come out, yes, it needs to be investigated. Yes, it needs to be correctly dissect. But when you hear things like that, implications of stuff like that coming out, that may be correct motive for someone to kill somebody. That may be the motive that Aubrey was killed. When you hear accusation, or when you hear evidence of that nature. With the George Floyd case, you don't hear that kind of language, and you don't hear any accusations coming from any other eyewitnesses that says, yes, this cop said this and this cop said that. And this cop in the past has said these type of things, with his friends or buddies. If you remember the O.J. Simpson case, where the detective on that case actually, there was testimony that said that he actually used the N-word, the word nigger or nigga or whatever. He actually used the N-word. Okay. So that is what sort of threw his testimony out, or his credibility out, because now there's racial implications to go along with you. Because obviously with the O.J. Simpson case, they were saying that evidence was planted to convict O.J. And by the detective that was on that case, using those type of terms in private conversations, and they being revealed in his court hearing, now his credibility is thrown out, and now he's looked like he's viewed as a racist because of his statements. And if you remember, when they asked him about those statements, he pleaded the fifth. He didn't want to come out and actually say that's what he said. Okay? So bring it all the way now when we deal with the George Floyd case. Is there evidence to suggest that there was racial implications there? Was there evidence to say that this is why they killed him, because they are racist? I would say, look at the video, no, there's no evidence that says for sure that they were racist. But could there have been a motive, unannounced motive in their hearts that they had a racial past? Could there have been? Sure. There's an argument out there that says that they didn't kill him because they were racist. They killed him because they view black people as inferior. And I'm like, okay, well, that's an interesting argument. And I think that deserves some level of, what's the word I'm looking for? Some level of thought to take into consideration, some level of consideration there, because that is some of the history from the past, right? That reveals some of the history of the past treatment of black people. And does racism erase after only a couple centuries? No. Racism is still here. Racism is going nowhere. So could the fact that he was killed because he is viewed as an inferior, someone who is inferior, there's a distinct possibility there. There is a distinct possibility there that he could have been viewed as someone that is inferior. Now, I don't think anyone in their right mind would deny the possibility of that. Because when we talk about somebody being murdered, somebody being killed, that's usually how people are viewed. They're viewed not made in the image of God, but they're viewed as being inferior and not worth the time or day or the consideration or the love to care after that individual. So that may be a plausible reason why the cops killed Floyd. So that would probably be where I would probably sit in. I would sit in that area instead of saying, yes, they had motive to kill. The motive to kill him was because of racism. That is not necessarily the case, and the video footage does not reveal that. And that's why I'm concerned that these individuals may get off. I'm concerned of that because the video footage doesn't show that it's a level of first degree murder. I think they're going for second degree murder. So that's my concern, is that they may get off because the video footage doesn't show any true motive of a premeditation of murder. And because the district attorney, I think that what he filed was second degree murder and manslaughter. And if I'm not mistaken, second degree murder, in order to get that, there has to be shown some level of not necessarily premeditation, but just some level of just wanting to do it, if that makes sense. I don't know the exact terminology. You guys can help me out there. But I think there has to be some level of desire there. So that's the nerve-wracking part right there. That's what makes me nervous, is that they're going to get off. They're going to get off, and because of the video footage, and because the DA going after something that that's not able to hold on to these cops, or this particular case, he threw second degree murder, and that may not be able to stick. So in my head, I'm like, why didn't the DA go after something that would stick on these guys, that would get these guys, and something that cannot be seen or viewed in a different fashion? And that's the concern. And so and let me start interacting with some of these comments real quick. All right. So Rivers says, it looks like Floyd knew he was going back to prison. It looked like he's going back to prison for the 6th time, and did all the usual acting that criminals do when they know they're being filmed in order to make the police appear to be abusive. That "I can't breathe" excuse started long before Floyd was even on the ground. His death was obviously an accident due to multiple factors. Yeah, I mean, looking at the video footage, I can't really argue with you, Rivers. I can't really argue with that statement. Do I think that he died from multiple causes? That's hard to say, because to say that the drugs killed him is not fair. And this is why it's not fair, because it assumes that he would have died anyway, regardless if the cop kneeled on his neck or not. So I think that is unfair to say that he died of multiple causes. It's like this whole coronavirus thing going on, right? When people die of heart attacks, they say, oh yeah, he died of the coronavirus. No, he didn't die of the coronavirus. The man died of a heart attack, right? He died of a heart attack. He didn't die of a coronavirus. And I think this is some of the same thing. Yeah, he may have had fentanyl and other methamphetamines inside his system, but you cannot say that that was a part of the reason he died. I think the reason he died is because the cops did not take into consideration his health. And they said that, hey, are you on something? Are you on drugs? Are you on something? That should have brought a red flag up to these guys and said, okay, there's a particular care that needs to go on with this guy. Okay? I would have even said tase the guy. Instead of kneeling on his neck, tase his butt or something. You know what I mean? To subdue him instead of kneeling on his neck. And I think that is where they messed up. And I think that is why he died. I don't think it was due to the fentanyl and methamphetamines why he died. I think it was because he got kneeled on his neck, and that's why he died. So that's what I would say to that. Here's another comment. Gospel truth. I'm pretty sure this cam evidence was released by the courts later. I don't think the media had access to the full footage until very recently, but I could be wrong. Okay, fair enough. I was told that it was and this is the thing though. While that may be true, while the footage may not have been released to the media, I think the media needs to take better care of what they're doing, because what they do is that they take certain footage and they just put it out there without properly dissecting it. It's almost like they want to be the first ones to release it, and instead of taking the proper care and putting right, true, factual information out there, now we get half truths, and this is what we got now because of a half truth that was told. And now we have rioting and burning of buildings and so forth. And this is from my dude, Jonathan Soko. It really doesn't matter if he was a racist or not. I agree. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if he's a racist. What he did was absolutely 100% wrong, and it does not matter. It does not matter at all for what he did. He kneeled on that man's neck for 9 minutes. The man died. Simple as that, right? And here is another comment. The reason they made it about race is so they can start another race war. Oh, you may be right, Louis. You may be right, man. It could be. And I wouldn't be surprised. The division that we see in this country right now is crazy. And I can say that it's the worst division I've seen in my lifetime. I was born in 1980, so I obviously wasn't living during the time of Jim Crow. But the racial tension that we see now in our country is probably the most tension I've seen or can bring to memory. So it's pretty brutal right now. And I mean, what are we to do, right? What are we to do right now as Christians? What are we to do? We are to pray, and we are to share the gospel. We are to share the gospel, and wherever we can step in and help with these areas of problems, we need to, right? We need to step in. So that's a very important aspect. So that's all I want to show as far as the George Floyd situation. So now what I want to do, I do want to go over the will of God. I do want to talk about the different wills of God. And I think this fits in exactly what we're talking about. God and his will. Restart. Let me set this up real quick. So it doesn't skip around. All right, so I do want to talk about the will of God. This is probably a sticking point for many people when it comes to talking about the will of God. We have the whole Arminian, Molinism, Calvinist, provisionist debate that's going on. And, these are the areas where they touch on and where they find many concerns. And was it God's will for George Floyd to die? Could there have been another will? Could there have been another area where God, another way? I mean, those are questions that we have to ask as Christians. Is it God's will for this type of stuff to happen? Is God's will, does evil have a place in God's will? Did he decree these evils? Are these areas where God allows libertarian free will so that God would not be held to any level of responsibility as for sin or anything like that? Or is there total hard determinism? These are the different facets of area where people argue from, right? And I think this is important for us to discuss. This is important for us to understand. Okay, so let's dive into some of this stuff. Let me close some of this stuff out real quick, and let's dive into this real quick. All right, so God's will, sovereign decretive will. His sovereign decretive will is his secret will. His preceptive will, the moral commandments or desires, and will of disposition, what pleases God. And, the many Christians, they frustrate themselves about this. They frustrate themselves about God's will, about God's sovereign will. And we have to understand what sovereign will is. Sovereign will is that secret will that God has. And this is a will that is not readily revealed to all of us. Obviously, God has a secret purpose for everything that takes place. God has a secret will that has to take place. And later down the road, that secret will that was once secret anyway is now revealed. It's now revealed to those, his people, or to the world, if you will. So when we dive into these areas of will, we have to understand there are several aspects to it. We have sovereign decretive will, perceptive will, will of disposition. And it's good to dive into this area. It's good to try to understand this area, because I think that will alleviate a lot of the frustration that comes about when we begin to discuss this area of disagreement, when we have in-house discussions with other Christians. So once again, the sovereign decretive will. The sovereign decretive will, the will by which God brings to pass whatsoever he decrees. This is hidden to us until it happens. This is that decretive, that will, that everything that happens in history, will come, that we've seen so far is a will that God has preordained, predetermined to come to pass. And that even includes evil acts, okay? That even includes evil acts, acts that are contrary to God's will. And this is where people get real edgy and scared of, because they don't want to say that God has done something evil. They don't want to put God and evil or sin in the same light, on the same plateau, because we know that evil is not of God's nature. And that's a fair concern. Those who are convinced of the Calvinist position, such as myself, we don't put him in that same light either. We do not say that God is the author of evil. If you understand what evil is a privation or a negation of good. So when Adam and Eve sinned in a garden, before that, everything was good. When Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, now evil comes to the world because of that disobedience. Okay? There's evil is no more than a privation or a negation of good. So God did not create evil, but God will use that evil in order to accomplish his overall goal, in order that his will be done. That his will be done. Okay? So when we're scared to talk about God's sovereignty as it relates to evil, we need to tread lightly, because if we say that God did not decree any evil, that means that God has no control of it. That means that evil, in a sense, is it's freelancing and doing whatever it wants to do, and it has the same power as God, in a sense, because God is not controlling evil. God doesn't know what to do with evil. So therefore, it has its own level of will. It has its own will. Evil has its own will, instead of God having sovereignty over evil, because he decreed it he decreed this evil to come about in history. Okay, whatever comes to pass in history will happen. It will happen. So that means that not only the good, but also the evil that we see in the world. Why does it have to be that way? Because God desired it that way. And that is why that he has full, unadulterated control of what he permits and what he pushes back on. Okay? So we have to understand that. We have to understand that is the case, because God has full control over all things. If there's something out of his sovereign will, how does he have control of it? That makes no sense. This is God's secret will. God does not owe anyone a reason for withholding things from us. So this idea that God, this being his secret will, this being something that is not readily revealed to those who read, those who follow him, that is something that we just have to deal with. It's not anything that we can control. And this is where I point back that a lot of Christians, they wreck themselves over this stuff. They really wreck themselves because they're searching for, what is God's will for my life? Wait, hold on. Let God do what he do. Whatever comes to pass in your life and it happens, whatever happens and is a part of your life, that is God's decree. That is God's sovereign will, sovereign ability, or sovereign will. When people say that someone is acting outside of God's sovereign will, what they're really saying, or the implications of what they're saying, whether they realize it or not, is that this individual is able to do what he wants to do, independent of what God would want. Okay, I'm gonna say that again. When someone says that someone's acting on their free will, when someone's acting on their free will and they say, well, the implications of that is that they are saying they are able to do whatever they want, independent of what God will is. So I can act contrary to what God's sovereign decretive will. Now we're going to step into perceptive will, and that is a part of God's overarching will. We're going to step into that, but I don't want to go there yet. It says the things that come to pass in history is the secret will. Everything that comes to pass, whether good or evil, is decreed to happen, because that is the history long. So we look at the stories in the Old Testament. We look at Abraham lying about his wife Sarah being his sister instead of his wife. These things happen because there's a part of the history. Israel was a conduit for the Messiah to come. So these type of things happen because this is a part of God's history of how he desired for it to go. In order to say that person did not do the will or sovereign will of God, is to say that God is out of control. God has no control. God has control, but God has a way had a purpose and a point of directing things the way that he wanted them to go in order to bring forth the Messiah. Okay? So we see this all through the Old Testament. People are sinning, people are doing these things. And while it may not be God's moral will for them to do these things, nonetheless, God used that evil in order to accomplish his sovereign historical will, or what he wanted to do. Okay? God is in full control because his will is not frustrated. No one can frustrate his will. Okay? So the things that are going about, things that are happening right now, that it has to be a part of his overarching will for these things to happen. Because why? Because he's allowing these things to happen. When God has all power to stop it, when he's allowing all things he has all power to stop these things from happening. Okay, so we look at Acts 2:23. This man, delivered over by a predetermined plan and foreknowledge of God, you nailed to a cross by the hands of godless men and put him to death. We see that clearly in this. We look at ourselves in the face of our sin and we say, how could God allow this to happen? Well, yes, God permitted certain things to happen, but also God permitted and allowed the death of his son, predetermined plan and foreknowledge of God. God knew that this was going to happen before the foundations of the world. He knew that this was going to happen. This is not something that caught God by surprise. This is not something that frustrated his sovereign will. This is something that he knew what was going to happen. Okay? And it says, and these men, godless men, nailed him to the cross and killed him. Okay? So this is something that we have to understand, is that in the face of our sin, in the face of our sin, we have to understand that God has a will and God has a purpose for allowing these things to come about, to happen. Why? Because God has an ability to stop it. So why does he not stop it? Okay. It's a part of the will. I can say personally that, yes, I went through the whole molestation thing, but because of this kind of stuff that happened in my life, God has a way of revealing himself to me. He has a way of revealing himself. When I got saved, that was a part of that was a part of what God revealed to me, as far as him being able to comfort me and bring me to a saving grace in him. That was a part of that. That was a part of my salvation process in a way. So the things that we go through, God is able to use them. God permits these things in order to use them for his glory. And that's a hard pill to swallow for many, but I'm convinced that that's what the Bible teaches. So the next thing is preceptive will, okay? This is a revelation of commandments, or the revelation of his moral will, okay? So preceptive will is God's revealed law and commandments, which we have the power to break, but not the right to break. So if we look at the preceptive will, like, okay, for example, God will say, thou shalt not kill. Obviously, people kill. Okay, so obviously God is permitting or allowing us to act out on that, or somebody who kills, allowing that person to act out their desires. Okay, and obviously it doesn't just go to murder; it goes up to the most vile things that we can possibly think of. Okay, and this is where the Calvinist position comes in and says that, yes, God is sovereign over all, but man does have a free will. That free will is allotted to the desires, the nature of that person. So that person has a nature, that person has a desire. That man's free will, or that woman's free will, will be controlled, if you will, by that person's nature. Okay, and that's where the Calvinist comes in and says that. All right, the Calvinist, soft determinists. Obviously, you have hard determinists or hyper Calvinism, but you also have soft determinists that says that God has determined all things to come to pass, but also man has a free will. Okay, and that free will is according to that person's nature. Okay, so man is permitted to break his will, but do not have the moral right to break it. A lot of times when people say, okay, God is permitting me to do these things, God is allowing me to think, God is all sovereign, but God is allowing me to do these things, so I have the right to sin. But that is just not the case. God is saying, no, you don't have the right to sin. You're still obligated to be under the wrath. You're still under the wrath, my wrath, but I will permit you to sin. I will permit you to act in according to your nature. Okay? I will permit you. And yes, God does step in at times and says, no, he thwarts it. You know what I mean? But man does have the ability to go against God's moral will, if that makes sense. God is not guilty for man's sin, though the permitted sin may be a part of God's secret will. This is what I was talking about, that man has a desire to do the things according to their nature. And if they act according to their nature and they do whatever, obviously they sin, that sin that was permitted is used by God in his secret will, his overarching will. So if something happens to somebody, we don't know the overarching resolve of how that's going to turn out. Only God knows, okay? Only God knows what will come about of that secret will, okay? It can lead to someone dying, or it can lead to someone's coming to faith in Christ, and being a pastor, everything, you know what I mean, or whatever it may be, you know what I mean. That person can come, that secret will that God has in store for those instances of someone being sinned against or someone sinning against somebody, can lead to a miraculous change. It can lead to that desire that God desires for what is going to come about. Okay, and we see this in Matthew chapter 26, verse 14 to 16, we see Judas. Okay, this is a story of Judas when he betrays Jesus for 30 shekels of silver. Okay, 30 coins, if you will. And so this, I would say, this is probably an example of someone's God permitting someone to sin, but obviously Judas' sin was used in order to accomplish God's overall will. And to, obviously from the perspective of the disciples, though Jesus repeated to them over and over again that he was going to die and things like that, the disciples just did not understand what he was talking about. All right. And, a lot of people, a lot of the Pharisees, Sadducees who interacted with Jesus didn't know what he was talking about. Like they knew that he was referencing Old Testament laws and things like that and prophetic statements. But that's why they were appalled that Jesus was allotting those prophetic statements to himself. And they were appalled, so much so, obviously, they killed Jesus, right? They killed him for, quote unquote, blasphemy, right? When we get to Judas, Judas, obviously, and nobody knowing God's secret will or what was going to happen, right? What was the desire for God's will to happen? Judas sinned against the Lord. God permitted Judas to sin. He allowed him to sin. He allowed Judas to thwart against God, against his moral will. Right? He allowed Judas to say, I'm not going to flow in line with your moral desires. Right? And what happened? He rejected Jesus. He sinned against Jesus. He betrayed Jesus, and Jesus ended up on the cross. Okay, and died for the sins of the world. And that's what I mean, is that while we as sinners and finite men, we may view something as, man, that sin was horrible, and that sin was evil, and that sin was bad. And you may be right. You may be 100% right. And when we hear about things like happening, abortion, when we hear about these things, when we hear about abortion, when we hear about things happening to children, those are the most heart-wrenching things that we could probably think of, right? And we say that is an absolute 100% evil. And we all agree that is a 100% evil. But we also seen evil that happened to Jesus. Was that a part of God's will for that to happen to Jesus, the most innocent man to ever live? Yes, it was part of God's decretive will. In the same way that God had a purpose for allowing that, because Jesus died on the cross for our sins, is the same way that God has a purpose of allowing certain things. And some of the most horrific things. And it's not that Jesus or God is sitting up there and sitting there on the throne and saying, ha ha ha, I'm glad that happened. No, he's not saying that. What God is saying is that these things have to happen in order for my will to be accomplished at the end of the day, at the end of it all. These things are going to come about in the same way that Judas had to betray Jesus in order for what to properly to come about. These things, you can't deny that happened. You can't deny these things that visibly happen. And we also read in Genesis 50, chapter 20, as for you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good in order to bring about this present result to preserve many people alive, right? So we look at these things and we don't typically understand. And Joseph understood at the end of it all, when Joseph was over in Egypt and he preserved Jacob, his father Israel, and his brothers, and he preserved a whole lot of people, the Israel tribe. If they would have stayed in I forget where exactly what location they was at, man. Oh man, I think Atlanta, I can't remember. I'm sorry, it escapes me now. But if Israel and his sons would have stayed where they were at during a famine, that whole lineage would have died out, right? Because God's covenant was with Jacob. It was with Israel. And through that lineage, the Messiah was to come. So when Joseph points out, what you meant for evil against me, okay, we see that perceptive will, right? We see that perceptive will, what you meant for evil against me, God permitting the brothers to sin against Joseph, God meant it for good in order to bring about his present result. What is that present result? To preserve many people alive. Talking about Israel, talking about his brothers, talking about the fact that the Messiah was to come through that lineage. So in the face of evil, when we see evil all the time, when we see these things coming about and we're like, why is God allowing these things? Why does God allow these things? Does not God have the power to stop it? What's going on here? Yes, he has the power to stop it. The reason he's not stopped it because he has a will that he desires to accomplish. And it is wrong and sinful for us as finite men to question the will of God, of what he desires to do. Okay? What he desires to allow to happen and what he desires to allow to intercede in and what he allows. Okay? We have to be mindful and cognizant of that and where our limits are. Because if we tread on ground that we're not supposed to tread on, now we're in a state of sinfulness. And we cannot be there. I think the scriptures, I'm convinced that the scriptures are very clear that God has a sovereign will, that nothing will thwart, that his sovereign will is not frustrated, but he also allows people to sin, which is preceptive will. He allows people to sin and go against his commandments. People are guilty because they're acting according to their nature and God's moral law stands. They are still guilty. Why? Because it is not God that is making these people do it. It is not God that's causing the people to act out. People are acting out according to their sinful nature that they have already. So when they act out according to that nature, it is that person acting upon a free will that is according to his or her nature, which makes them guilty before God. Okay? That is the flat out truth of that matter. That's what I'm convinced of. After that, we have the will of disposition. What pleases God? God has made it very aware to all of us what exactly pleases God. Okay? What pleases him? Okay? This is something that God has revealed to us. Describes God's attitude or disposition. It reveals what is pleasing to him. We read in Ezekiel 33:11, it says, "To them as I live, declares the Lord God, I take no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but rather that the wicked turn from his way and live. Turn back from your evil ways. Why then will you die, O house of Israel?" And this is a point of God revealing to his people his desires. Okay? It is not God's will or desire for the way he doesn't desire, he doesn't take pleasure, should I say, in the death of the wicked. It's not something that he sits on his throne and he just laughs and says, ha ha ha, ha ha ha, I'm so glad they're dying, ha ha ha. No, this is not how God interacts. It pains God in order for when the wicked dies, because this was not his original plan for sin to come in the world and sin entering the world. Okay, this was not a part of his, if you will, what he would have desired for to happen, if that makes sense. He doesn't take pleasure in that. His sovereign will, he permitted all these things to happen in order to accomplish his will, but he's not just sitting up there laughing about when the wicked dies, if that makes sense. So it's important that we understand that his will is, his desire is not the death of the wicked, but rather that the wicked turn away from their lives, turn away from their ways and live. Also in 1 Samuel 15:22, Samuel said, "Has the Lord as much delight in burnt offerings and sacrifice as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fatted ram." So this whole idea, this is Samuel speaking to Saul. Okay, because Saul sinned against the camp. He sinned against God. He did sacrifices when he wasn't supposed to. So there was a whole bunch of sin going down there. And Samuel, Samuel was chastising Saul for what he did. He rather Saul obey that he's not supposed to do sacrifices, because as you remember, they had people in place to do sacrifices, Levitical priests. They had all these individuals in place to do sacrifice. So by Saul doing the sacrifice, he disobeyed God. And Samuel was pointing out, hey, God's will, God's desire is for someone to obey rather than sacrifice. Okay, so Saul sinned, and this is the desire that God has. God desires obedience rather than sacrifice. So these are just two examples of what God desires, of what His disposition is. Some of the stuff that His will of disposition. So in the end, we see God's will. When God closes, and I like this quote from John Calvin. It says, when God closes His holy mouth, I will desist from inquiry. So the things that God reveals about Himself and the things that He don't reveal about Himself, we need to keep that in view. Okay, and when God stops revealing certain things about Himself, where the Bible doesn't touch on, or things that are out of our scope, because we're finite men, we're sinful men, we need to be careful that we don't try to wreck our minds or wreck our hearts over what is God's secret will, because it's secret for a reason. There's a level of mysteriousness, right? There's a level of that to where we need to not tread on areas that we just don't know, and we'll never know, perhaps. And I really appreciate that quote from John Calvin. When God closes His holy mouth, I will desist from inquiry. And I think that's the humble path we need to take there. So in Lamentations 3:37-39, it says, "Who is there who speaks and comes to pass unless the Lord has commanded it? Is it not from the mouth of the Most High that both good and ill go forth? Why should any living mortal or any man offer complaint in view of his sins?" So whatever God allows to come about, whatever God desires to come about, it is not our place to question that, because it points out, hey, you're sinful. You're not God. And, and this reminds me of the whole deal with Job as well, where Job questioned God, and God quickly put him in his place. And if you remember in Job, it was actually God that asked Satan, have you considered my servant Job? It wasn't like Satan that came to him and said, hey man, I want to mess with Job. It was God who first stepped in and said, hey man, have you considered my servant Job? Like when you read that, you're like, oh man, dude, is he does God want Satan to mess with Job? And you're like, I know that's how I was, I was like, man, how's, God, why are you allowing Satan to mess with Job like that? You know what I mean? And it was actually God who asked Satan, have you considered my servant Job? So he's almost like petitioning Satan to go mess with Job in a way, and these are different aspects that we look at, and we don't fully understand it. We don't fully get it. Like, why would that happen? We don't fully get it. But I think it's important for us to understand that even in our misunderstanding, even in when we don't understand things, and even when we have a hard time rationalizing things or reconciling things or coming to a conclusion about things, it is not it's not our purpose to come to those type of conclusions. It is God's will that certain things happen. It's His sovereign will, His decreed will that these things will come to pass in history, and that's not only the grand scale or the grand scale of history, but that's our individual histories as well, right? We're a part of that history, right? So God is not playing like, oh yeah, I'm gonna mess with this history. No, it's a grand scale outcome of what He desires, and He will accomplish His will. And that will has to do with evil. It has to do with righteousness, and we don't like to allot God with evil. We can't even imagine God using evil in order to accomplish His will, because we're like, man, evil comes in all shapes and forms, from the murder of a child all the way to punching somebody in the eye. I sort of switched the degree of sin there. It's hard for us to understand it. I get it. It's hard for me to reconcile that. But when I see God interacting with certain like I said, the whole idea with Job, when I see God interacting with Satan and he asked Satan, have you considered my servant Job, in a way of almost like petitioning Satan to mess with him. And when I see scriptures like in Acts chapter 2, where it says that it was part of his predetermined foreknowledge plan in order for the Son of Man to die, you know what I mean, at the hands of godless men. When I see those type of verses that God knew that he was going to kill the only innocent man to ever live, the God-man, Jesus, that kind of stuff, it's hard to wrap your mind around. It's hard to wrap your mind around because you're trying to reconcile evil, the problem of evil, and justify God's goodness in the problem of evil. And that's what you call a theodicy. And some people may do the free will theodicy, and I think the free will theodicy falls short because it almost implies that God has no control over evil. And it's an attempt to give man this libertarian free will to act, but I think the deterministic aspect of the deterministic theodicy is probably better equipped to handle the problem of evil, because nothing is out of God's control. God is in control, and God will permit what he wants to permit, and he will decree what he wants to decree, and he will intercede when he wants to intercede. God is in full control of that. But that's what I'm convinced of. Obviously, there's different perspectives, and there's different ways of illustrating or explaining what I just explained. And obviously, and that's fair. You know what I mean? And that's fair. And that's a great thing about the body of Christ, is that there are varying degrees of differences, and we can talk about these things. And that's cool. We can talk about these things. That's cool. And there's no problem with that. I pray that, and obviously there are many out there who don't agree with my position, and that's fine. I don't need you to agree with me. That is not why I'm here, to get your agreement. I'm here to study the Word of God, and I'm convinced that this is what the Word of God teaches. And so, just, take these things into consideration. Do your own study. I hope that this was, like I said, I hope this was a blessing to you. And when we look at God's will in the face of what is going on right now, as far as the George Floyd fiasco that we have going on right now, these riots and stuff like that, ask yourself, what is God's will with this? Is this a part of God's will? And don't wreck your brain and your mind on how will this finish, because we know the end of the story in the Bible, right? We know that God has revealed that to us. In the end of the Bible, God wins at the end. Okay? It is our job as Christians to stay in the faith and believe on him, pray, fast, and obviously, most importantly, preach that gospel. Tell people about the gospel of Jesus Christ. Okay? So with that said, I am going to get out of here. But I thank you for joining me on this episode of Let's Talk. And I hope we're able to discuss this further. May God bless you and may God keep you. Go.